Right, let us address the chart. They can be quite alarming, I suppose, when you look at them, but I'm hoping that we can have a chat about them and it will stop you feeling quite so nervous. And although this looks like an extremely complicated chart, I want to show you a little trick. I've just got some plain paper here and I'm going to cover up everything except one row. Okay, and you can barely see that. I understand that. But when you do this yourself, you can just see one row and it's much less scary because what you can actually just see is a small amount of the pattern. So my first tip is to say to you, as we go through charts, just remember you are only going to be working one row at a time. And in actual fact, you're only ever going to be working one stitch at a time. Okay, so what you're basically doing with the chart is you're seeing the whole project really in its entirety. And I think if we looked at any of the things, any of the knitting projects we undertake in such a visual way, it's all there in front of you, it might seem quite overwhelming. But we're only ever going to knit one stitch at a time, remember that. So looking at this in its entirety then, each of these little boxes do represent one stitch on your needles. This is a really nice chart. I know, like I said, it looks quite complicated, but in actual fact it isn't, because what you will notice on this whole chart is they are just blue squares or white squares. There's nothing else. There's no symbols, there's no nothing. And the reason for that is because every single stitch on this chart is just a knit stitch. There are no decreases, increases, yarn overs, nothing. It is just knit all the way around, and you can do that. So that's absolutely fine. Essentially, all this chart is telling you is what colour to use for that next stitch. So for example, if we look at these stitches here, we'll just say, right, okay, so I'm working 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches in blue, and then I'm going to switch to white, and then on and on and on. Just to remind you here that you might have blue and white, you might have green and white, you might have green and purple. So your blue stitches on this chart represent your main colour, and your white stitches represent your contrast colour. And as long as you assign a main colour and assign a contrast colour, that is absolutely fine. Okay, there is no need to worry about anything else than that. The blue is the main, the white is the contrast. Every one of these squares is a stitch. So as you're working, what direction are you working in? Okay, we're very lucky because we're working in the round, which means there's no purl stitches at all, which is fantastic when you're working stranded or colour work or fair isle knitting. You're always going to start from the bottom right of the chart, and you're always going to work from right to left and from bottom to top when you're working in the round. Okay, you're not having to turn and come back, you're going right to left on every round. The numbers up the side represent the round numbers. The numbers across the bottom and top represent stitch numbers. Now we've got these fairly obvious red lines on our charts, and the reason for that is that we've got 3 sizes of sock that we can knit in this pattern, and the 3 sizes mean 3 different stitch counts. So the smallest stitch count is going to be between those 2 inner red lines. If you're working the small size, you're only going to be working from this line to this line, okay, between those lines. If you're working medium size, you're going to be working between those lines, so from this line all the way over to this line. And if you're working the larger size, you're going to be working the whole chart. So what that means is, if I'm working the larger size, I will start down in this right corner and I will knit 2 of the main colour, 1 contrast, 5 of the main colour, 1 contrast, 5 of the main colour, 1 contrast, and so on and so on. If I'm working the middle size, I will start at this red line and I will again start with 2 main, 1 contrast, 5 main, 1 contrast. And if I'm starting the small, I will start at this red line, 2, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, and so on. So we're only ever working the size between which red lines are relevant to us. So if you're working the smaller size or the medium size, get your pen or your scissors and cut off the bits that aren't relevant to you. Okay, and then there's absolutely no complication there at all. The only thing that, well, the thing that remains constant throughout is this central motif. That's going to run up the centre of your socks regardless of what size you're knitting. The only change is the number of these little speckles either side of it, and these speckles serve a brilliant purpose. They sort of hide any kind of jog. If you've worked the striped socks so far, or watched any of the striped sock videos, you'll see about the jog in there, and this hides that wonderfully. So there's really not very much else for you to worry about with the charts at the moment. So just a quick recap. We start from the bottom right corner, whether that's there, or there. We always work the charts from right to left and from bottom to top. Each of the squares represents a knit stitch. Each of the squares, if they're blue, represents your main colour. If they're white, represents the contrast colour. And we work each of the stitches on this chart once and once only. Okay, so try not to be too concerned about the charts. Once your lovely pattern starts emerging on your socks, you're going to be able to see, I've got a part worked one here. Let me have a look. Part worked sock. There you go. You can see how it relates to the chart, and once you have a few rounds on you, you'll be absolutely fine with it. So that's a really quick basic chart 101.